Savvy Chapter 2. Later that night, as I lay awake in the dark bedroom I shared with Gypsy, I listened to my sister's even breathing and to the steady patter of Fish's worried rain. I could hear Mama and Rocket moving around downstairs, sweeping up glass and replacing light bulbs. And though Grandpa had gone to bed as well, every now and then the ground would rumble and the floor would shake as though the earth below us had a bellyache. Mama and Rocket were leaving for Salina early in the morning and planning to stay in a motel near the hospital. I had begged to go see Papa and stay in a motel and get some of those little soaps all wrapped up in paper. But the rest of us had to stay at home with Grandpa. Rocket got to go because his electric touch was the only thing that could make the old station wagon run. Nobody had said anything about my birthday. Nobody had said much about much. I lay awake most of the night, unable to sleep, until Mama tiptoed in with the dawn to whisper a soft goodbye, kissing my cheek lightly with her perfect pink lips. Still upset that I wasn't allowed to go with her and Rocket to Salina, I pretended to be asleep, and soon after I heard the car door slam and the engine rumble to life at Rocket's spark as he and Mama drove away. That Friday before my birthday, Fish was in charge of looking after Gypsy and Grandpa Bomba. It was my job to get Samson up and ready for school and to make sure we both made it up the 3 steep steps of the big orange bus that took Samson and me the 15 miles to school in Hebron, Nebraska. I had to poke and prod broody Samson up the long, soggy, boggy road toward our mailbox, which had fallen over in the night after getting pushed 10 feet further to the west from all of Grandpa's worried rumbling. Samson didn't say much waiting for the bus, but Samson never did. "It's Missy Pissy and her storm cloud," Ashley Bing said every day when Samson and I climbed onto the bus. And every day, Emma Flint repeated, "Missy Pissy," with a snorting laugh like it was a new and funny joke each time. The kids at school had learned on my very first day that my real name was Mississippi, which had been unfortunate. We Beaumonts got enough whispers and giggles as it was. The rumors were fierce, and I'd heard them all. "Look, it's the weird kids. My mom said they had to move here because one of them got into some huge kind of trouble. I heard the oldest brother got hit by lightning, and now he's dangerous and hardly ever leaves the house. That family ought to live on an ark. It's almost always storming at their place, and one of these days, they'll just wash away for good." I knew that after I blew out my own 13 dripping candles, it'd be adios and aloha to Hebron Middle School, as well as to Ashley Bing and Emma Flint and everyone else like them. After my birthday, my poor moody Samson would be a lonesome shadow in the back of the big orange bus while I grew moss in pickle jars with Fish and Rocket back at home. It was hard for us Beaumont kids to make friends and keep them. It wasn't safe to invite anyone over with Fish and Rocket still learning to scumble their savvies. We couldn't risk someone finding out or getting hurt by sparks or storms if my brothers lost control. Like so many things, a savvy could take years to tame, and Mama and Papa said the ups and downs of growing up only added to the challenge. My last day at Hebron Middle School was a slow, creeping crawl of a day. It was hard to concentrate on X plus Y equals Z when my thoughts were all tied up at Salina Hope Hospital. It was harder still to spell accommodate and adolescence and armadillo when I thought of Papa waiting for Mama to come and give him a fairy tale kiss that would wake him up, and I couldn't imagine how often in my life it might be so very important to spell armadillo. But of all things, it was hardest to listen to Ashley Bing and Emma Flint whisper and stare when the teacher said, "I'd like everyone to join me in wishing Mibs Beaumont a fond farewell. Today is her last day here at Hebron Middle School. Mibs will be homeschooled beginning next week." Everyone turned in their seats to look at me. Nobody smiled or wished me a fond sort of anything. Most of the kids just shrugged and turned back around. "Missy Pissy is going home to stay with her mommy," Ashley said, as though she were talking to a baby, just quiet enough that the teacher couldn't hear. "With her mommy," Emma repeated. "She's going to stay home so that no one can see what a friendless freak she is," Ashley sneered. "What a freak she is," mimicked Emma like a spiteful parrot. It was a good thing for Ashley and Emma that Mama kept us kids home once we had our savvy. By the end of the day, I was hoping that mine might give me the muscle to turn nasty girls into slimy green frogs, or to glue their mouths shut tight with a nod of my head. When Samson and I got back home that afternoon, a shiny gold minivan was parked in front of our house, and Fish was angrily blasting it clean with the garden hose. With its smiling angel air freshener dangling in the front window, I recognized the van immediately. It belonged to Miss Rosemary, the preacher's wife. Mama made the whole family go to church in Hebron every Sunday despite any fears of savvy catastrophes, and Miss Rosemary was well known to us all. She smelled like Lysol and butterscotch, and she made her own matching sets of rights and wrongs, like suitcases she made other people carry. And she took it upon herself to make everything and everyone as ship-shape and apple pie as she felt the Lord had intended them to be. Somehow, the news had already reached the preacher's wife about Papa's accident and about the rest of us being on our own without a mama. Miss Rosemary had come to set things right. Water spun from the hose in Fish's hand, swirling around the van like a cyclone, and the winds churned up by his bad mood. The trees next to the house, bright yellow-green with leafy spring, bent and swayed. Fish lowered the hose when he saw us coming, his face stormy black. "If you know what's good for you, you'll sneak in the back." He nodded his head toward the house. We all stood and looked sadly at our own lovely house as though we'd just found out a grizzly bear had moved in and pulled all the stuffing from the furniture and torn all the pictures from the walls and eaten all the special occasion mini marshmallows from the high-top shelf above the refrigerator while we were gone. Then, like a break in bad weather, Fish smiled his cockeyed smile and sprayed the hose my way teasingly. "Last day away to school, eh, Mibs?" "Last day," I said, dodging the water from the hose. Leaving Fish to finish his chore, Samson and I quietly let ourselves in through the back door, hoping to make it up the stairs before Miss Rosemary knew we were there. "Your grandfather looked tired, so I had him lie down in his room for a rest," Miss Rosemary said the moment we entered the kitchen. She was perched up high with a spray bottle cocked in one rubber-gloved hand and a rag held ready in the other. She was taking the jars from the tops of the cupboards and cleaning their dust with a wrinkle in her nose, squinting at the faded labels. I held my breath as I watched her, hoping she hadn't opened any of them. No one who wasn't family should have been touching those jars. No one. "Gypsy is also down for a nap," Miss Rosemary continued, "so I expect you two to be quiet and not wake her." "Yes, Miss Rosemary," Samson and I both said, but Samson mostly moved his lips. "Your mother should have called me the moment she found out about your poor father," Miss Rosemary said, dusting the last jar with a flourish. Satisfied with her work, she clasped both the spray bottle and the rag to her chest and closed her eyes as though she was praying for the strength to clean up the whole wide world. When she opened her eyes, she gave us a stern and solemn look. "I ought to have been here sooner," she sighed. "Children need a mother in the house." Chapter 3. I knew that Miss Rosemary was not a proper replacement for our perfect mama. I knew it down in the pit of my stomach, and I knew it down to the tips of my toes. A sick feeling washed over me as Miss Rosemary pointed her spray bottle dismissively toward the hallway opposite the stairs, and said, "I brought Roberta and Will Jr. with me to keep you company this afternoon. Why don't you two go find them? You can watch TV. Quietly." "Yes, ma'am," I mumbled, even though we didn't have any TV. With Rocket in the house, Mama and Papa wouldn't buy any fancy gadgets until they knew, sure as sure, that my brother could keep from destroying them all accidentally. Samson and I were eager to leave the kitchen, but not so eager to find Roberta and Will Jr., Miss Rosemary's younger children. The pastor and his wife had 3 children, but their older son was already 30 and worked as a state trooper in Topeka. No one talked about him much. Roberta, who everyone but her mother called Bobby, was 16 and probably only came over that afternoon because she hoped to find Rocket at home. Rocket, I supposed, was the kind of 17-year-old boy that 16-year-old fit-skiggly girls liked to act silly and stupid around, even if he did always look as though he'd stuck his finger in a light socket. "This is so lame," Bobby was saying as we entered the room. "I can't believe we had to come here." Bobby and Will Jr. had never been to our house before and were making themselves busy poking and peeking and prying. Bobby was shuffling through a stack of Mama's half-finished paintings, and Will Jr., holding one of Gypsy's wooden blocks, was prodding Samson's dead pet turtle where it lay inside a glass aquarium, pulled tight and unmoving into its shell. "Shut up, Bobby," said Will. "Their dad's in the hospital. Show a little sympathy." "We don't need your sorries," I said flatly, startling Will and Bobby, neither of whom had seen us come in. We're doing just fine, I added. Bobby turned to look at me and Samson as though we were the trespassers in the room. With a heavy, well-practiced teenage sigh, Bobby rolled her eyes, popped a pink gum bubble, and threw herself down on the sofa with a disgusted grunt. Isn't there anything to do in this house? She grumped, reclining and closing her eyes, laying one hand across her forehead dramatically. I noticed that Bobby had glitter eyeshadow and that her right eyebrow was pierced. A little gold hoop glinted, almost unseen, from underneath her long bangs. I wondered how Miss Rosemary had ever allowed that to happen. Just ignore her, said Will, glaring at Bobby, then looking kindly toward Samson and me. Will Jr. was 14 like Fish, though Will was taller and, unlike my brother, kept his curly brown hair neat. I'd always been curious about Will. I'd heard him say once that he wanted to grow up to be just like his daddy. And despite the way others at church shied away from us Beaumonts, Will always seemed to be walking on our heels or watching us when he was supposed to be praying. One time he even gave me his own cup of juice when the crowd at the punch bowl was too tight for me to squeeze past. But even though Will Jr. and Fish were the same age, and Fish didn't have a friend to his name, my brother never did like Will, thinking him to be nothing more than a holier-than-thou preacher boy. For my part, I thought he seemed nice, even though he was laced up a bit tight. Will turned back to the aquarium. So, is this turtle alive, or... He caught himself before saying dead, grimacing apologetically. Samson let go of my hand and coasted like a shadow across the room to pull his turtle out of its aquarium and away from Will Jr.'s curious inspection. After a long, unblinking stare at the older boy, Samson slipped from the room with his lifeless pet to go hide somewhere like a dusty gray moth. I knew my brother would turn up later behind a door or under his bed or beneath a pile of laundry. Setting down the wooden block and wiping his hands on his trousers, Will Jr. turned to look at me, doing a good job at mimicking a preacher's most pastorly concern. I hope Mr. Beaumont gets better, he said, as grave as a tombstone. We're all praying for your dad. Okay, I shrugged, uncomfortable. It's not that I was against praying. I prayed every night for my savvy to come and be the best savvy ever. I prayed for the power to fly or shoot lasers from my eyes. I also prayed for Grandpa Bomba and for Gypsy when she caught the croup. It's just that it hadn't yet crossed my mind to pray for Papa. And again, I felt selfish and shamed and bad enough to have a house come land plop down on me, leaving nothing but my feet sticking out. That's just how wicked I felt. Crossing the room, Will Jr. placed one hand on my shoulder in a weird, grown-up kind of way, leaning forward with a tilt to his head like he was checking my eyes for tears. Mother brought you a meatloaf, he said, as if that fixed everything. I took a step back, not too sure how I felt about having Will that close, even if he was just being nice. And while I was sure meatloaf could be a powerful thing, especially if it had a lot of ketchup and the onions were chopped up real fine, I knew that tonight, for the Beaumont family, meatloaf couldn't do squat.